Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're stepping outside the usual policy debates and examining a highly provocative text that diagnoses the unseen roots of our failing school systems. It's a fundamentally spiritual and structural critique. Okay, let's just dive right into this.
For decades, we've seen endless educational reforms, right? Policy shifts, new teaching methods, the whole shebang. Yet, despite all these massive efforts, severe issues like classroom collapse and rampant bullying, they're still just plaguing our public schools. It leaves us all with this burning question. Why? Why is a system still in such deep distress when we're constantly trying to fix it?
Well, to explore a uniquely different answer to that question, we're looking at the arguments presented in Chapter 3 of this book, The Laws of Life by Ryuho Okawa. This text offers a starkly spiritual diagnosis of these modern educational failures. Now, to be completely clear, we aren't here to take sides or endorse any specific viewpoints. Instead, we're going to unpack the fascinating architecture of the author's argument. It's a really bold framework that challenges conventional secular wisdom about exactly how we run our schools.
Section 1, The Collapse of Schools. Let's look at how the author frames the modern classroom environment and its visible symptoms.
According to the author, the widely implemented yutori, or relaxed education system, which was supposed to reduce coursework and ease the pressure on students, spectacularly backfired. The whole idea was that giving kids more freedom would, save them. Instead, the text argues it actually accelerated classroom collapse. Interestingly, the author observes that without that rigorous structure, schools inadvertently allowed bullying groups to multiply, literally turning them into training grounds for future criminals. Pretty heavy stuff.
And that brings us to Section 2, the closed sanctuary.
The author uses a really striking term to describe the isolation of these schools: extraterritoriality. Normally, you'd hear that in legal terms, like diplomats being exempt from local laws, right? But here, it describes how modern schools operate as these closed, autonomous zones. They completely repel outside intervention. The text points out that parents, police, the media, they're all systematically shut out. In fact, the author argues that these schools start to operate almost like pseudo-religions, with the principal acting like some unquestionable religious founder, running their own private fiefdom. The text actually uses this striking and honestly surprising metaphor to describe it. It calls these protected institutions a Dracula group. It's a powerful image, right? A system that just drains public tax money while aggressively shielding itself from the sunlight of external criticism. In this closed-off environment, the author notes that parents are basically manipulated into silence. They're treated almost as if their kids are being held hostage by the school, so they're terrified to speak out against the system's flaws because they fear retaliation against their own children.
Moving on to Section 3, the illusion of teachers. If the school is this impenetrable fortress, what happens to the guards inside? Well, the text highlights a massive disconnect between the ideal and the reality here. It contrasts the original intent of teacher protection, which was, to provide job stability so educators could focus entirely on teaching, with a much darker reality. The author points out that teachers often enjoy salaries higher than your average civil servant, alongside absolute job security. But without any external checks or the actual need to produce results, this guaranteed status just breeds a culture of corruption. It creates an environment where self-preservation and protecting your own status become the absolute highest priorities, way above the well-being of the students. Using another really powerful metaphor, the author describes corrupt, self-serving teachers as warped mirrors. Think about that for a second. If a teacher is supposed to be a role model, literally a mirror for the child to see what a functional adult should be, what happens when that mirror is distorted by deceit and self-interest? The text argues they project an ugly, deformed reality right onto the kids they're supposed to be guiding, effectively poisoning their minds and normalizing dishonesty. Which leads us to Section 4, the spiritual vacuum. At its core, the text argues these structural issues actually stem from something entirely unseen. According to Chapter 3 of the book, the fundamental root cause of all this educational devastation is the active removal of faith and religion from the public education space. The text suggests that by intentionally stripping away these spiritual tenets, public education didn't just become secular, it lost its sacredness, it lost its dignity and its moral authority. And the practical consequence of this spiritual vacuum? The author argues it's absolutely severe. Without universal moral values grounded in faith, schools lose the exact compass they need to teach the fundamental difference between right and wrong. Think about it.
If a teacher lacks a spiritual grounding in universal justice, how can they confidently and morally condemn a severe evil like bullying? The text posits that, well, they simply can't.
This naturally leads to Section 5, the devil's infiltration. Let's look at the ultimate consequence of this moral void. The text argues that when you combine all these elements, a school functioning as an unscrutinized sanctuary, run by teachers who are obsessed with self-preservation and completely lacking a universal moral compass, you create the perfect opening. An opening for what? Well, the author explicitly calls it out, the devil. In this spiritual diagnosis, systemic cover-ups of bullying and educators who lie to protect their jobs, they aren't just administrative failures. The author sees them as signs of active spiritual infiltration by evil forces taking advantage of a morally bankrupt environment.
And the author definitely does not mince words regarding where this is heading. Delivering a super powerful warning, the text states, if a policy is laid down that excluding religion is common sense, this world will rush headlong towards hell. When teachers ignore a victim of bullying just to protect their own comfortable status, the author argues they are actively succumbing to this dark influence. They essentially become complicit, allowing a literal hellish environment to manifest right there inside the classroom.
So how do we possibly fix this? Let's look at Section 6, Purifying the Educational System.
The author proposes a pretty rigorous two-part solution. Step 1, we have to strip away the school's extraterritorial rights. This means ripping off that protective veil, throwing open the doors, and subjecting the administration and the teachers to strict, uncompromising external audits and public scrutiny. Step 2, the system absolutely must reintroduce a foundational understanding of universal good and evil, basically bringing back the spiritual and moral values that were chased out of public education in the first place. Ultimately, the text argues that simple administrative tweaking just isn't going to cut it. Schools can only be purified by actively wielding a spiritually grounded sense of truth and justice against this moral decay. The system has to actively choose to separate good from evil, rather than hiding behind this facade of neutrality that, frankly, only protects the guilty. Only then can education finally regain its lost dignity. As we wrap up this explainer of these incredibly bold claims from Chapter 3 of the Laws of Life, it leaves us with some serious food for thought. Regardless of where you personally stand on the integration of spirituality in schools, the text forces us to confront the structural insulation of our classrooms. It asks us to consider, if we completely remove a definitive, universal compass of right and wrong from our institutions, what fills that void? Can true education even exist without it? It's a powerful question to carry with you. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.